You've seen it at least 4 times. You know exactly what's going to happen. You know the twist. You know who survives. You know the line that's coming 30 seconds before it arrives. And yet here you are on a Tuesday night pressing play on the same film you've already watched 4 times. Maybe it's a comfort show you put on while you eat dinner, half watching, half present, like visiting an old neighborhood. Maybe it's a movie that you return to every year at a specific season, almost ritually. Maybe you've rewatched an entire series so many times that you started noticing things in the background of shots that the directors probably didn't even intend as details. And somewhere in the back of your mind, there's a small voice asking, shouldn't I be watching something new? We live in the golden age of content. There are more films, more series, more documentaries available right now than any human being could watch in several lifetimes. The algorithm is perpetually offering you something fresh, something you haven't seen, something the internet says is unmissable. And yet you close the browser, scroll past the new releases, and go back to the thing you already know. People around you might find this mildly baffling. Maybe you find it mildly baffling yourself. You shouldn't. Because what's actually happening when you rewatch isn't laziness or lack of imagination or some failure to engage with the world. It's one of the most psychologically interesting things a human being can do for themselves. Let me show you why. Start with the brain and uncertainty. Your nervous system, at its core, is a prediction machine. Every waking moment, it is running simulations, generating expectations, preparing you for what comes next. That process is exhausting in ways we rarely consciously register. The world is genuinely uncertain, and navigating that uncertainty requires constant, low-level cognitive effort. New content, a film you've never seen, a series with an unknown ending, adds to that load. You're tracking characters, building a narrative map, holding open questions, bracing for emotional surprises. All of that happens underneath your awareness, but your brain is working for it. Now consider what happens when you rewatch something you already know. The prediction machine gets to rest. The narrative is resolved. The characters are known quantities. Your brain isn't bracing, it's settling. Neuroscientists call this narrative transportation. And the interesting thing is that the transportation feels different depending on whether you know the destination. When the ending is already secured in your memory, you travel through the story differently, more gently. You're not gripping the armrests. You're watching from a window seat, relaxed, noticing the landscape instead of calculating how to survive the landing. This is why rewatching is so strongly associated with stress relief. It isn't escapism in the pejorative sense, it's genuinely regulatory. It's your nervous system using a known emotional experience to modulate its own state, which is, if you think about it, extraordinarily sophisticated. There's also something fascinating happening with what psychologists call narrative identity. This is the idea, developed extensively by psychologist Dan McAdams, that human beings understand themselves through story. We don't experience our lives as a sequence of disconnected events. We experience them as a narrative with a self at the center, a self that has an arc, a history, a direction. And the stories we love, the ones we return to, become part of that self-narrative. They're not just entertainment, they're mirrors. Think about the films you've watched most, not just the ones you found impressive, but the ones you've genuinely returned to. There's usually something in them that resonates at a frequency you might struggle to put into words. A character who felt like recognition. A relationship dynamic that named something you'd experienced but never articulated. A theme that mapped onto your own life so precisely that watching it felt less like watching and more like being witnessed. When you rewatch those things, you're not just revisiting a story. You're revisiting yourself at different points in time. The film hasn't changed, but you have. And the gap between who you were the last time you watched this and who you are now is part of what makes the rewatch meaningful. Something you found heartbreaking at 22, you might find clarifying at 30. A character you once dismissed, you might now understand completely. The story becomes a kind of measuring stick for your own interior life. And then there's comfort. Let's talk about comfort specifically, because it deserves more respect than it usually gets. Psychologist Jay Derrick at the University of Buffalo ran a series of studies on what she called social surrogacy, the way that fictional relationships with characters can partially fulfill the psychological function of real social connection. When people felt lonely or depleted or socially drained, exposure to familiar fictional worlds with beloved characters actually replenished their sense of belonging. The characters functioned as something like social nutrition, not a replacement for real relationships, but a genuine supplement, a way for the brain to receive something it needed. This is why your comfort show is usually a comfort show specifically because of the characters. Not just the plot, not just the writing, the people. The familiar ensemble whose rhythms you know, whose voices you could reproduce, whose relationships feel like a known quantity in a world that often doesn't. There's a reason people rewatch Friends or The Office or whichever show is their particular version of a warm room. Those fictional worlds are stable. The characters don't change in unpredictable ways. They show up the same way every time. And for a person moving through a life that is often neither stable nor predictable, that consistency is genuinely nourishing. There's also an almost meditative quality to rewatching that doesn't get discussed enough. When you're watching something new, your attention is necessarily forward-facing. You're always slightly ahead of the present moment, anticipating, wondering, preparing. But when you know the story, your attention can finally be fully present. You're not watching for information, you're watching for experience. You notice the score for the first time because you're not busy tracking the plot. You catch the actor's eyes in a scene you'd previously focused on the dialogue. You appreciate the composition of a shot you'd blown past because you were anxious about what was coming next. This is why filmmakers and writers often rewatch things differently on their second or third viewing. Not because they're professionals, but because knowing the structure frees them to perceive the craft. The same thing happens to anyone. Rewatching is, in a very real sense, seeing more, not less. Now, is there a version of this that tips into something less healthy? Honestly, yes. When rewatching becomes purely avoidant, when it's the only way you can tolerate an evening alone, when it replaces engagement with your own life so consistently that you emerge from a comfort show binge feeling emptier than before, that's worth paying attention to. The question isn't whether you rewatch. The question is what you're using it for. As a way to come back to yourself, or as a way to stay away from yourself? For most people, most of the time, it's the former. And the former is not just acceptable, it's genuinely valuable. It's emotional self-regulation, it's identity exploration, it's social surrogacy, it's meditative attention. It's a form of returning to something that has mattered to you and letting it matter again. There's something quietly beautiful about the things we return to. Books get dog-eared, songs get played until you've worn a groove in them. Photographs get looked at long past the point where you need to be reminded. We are creatures who revisit, who circle back, who find meaning not just in encountering something once, but in the layered experience of returning. Rewatching is part of that very human impulse. The world keeps moving, keeps offering new things, keeps insisting on forward motion, and occasionally we get to say, no, wait, I want to sit here a little longer. I want to feel this again. That's not avoidance of life. That's a particular kind of savoring it. So what's yours? What's the film or the show you've returned to more times than you can reasonably count? I'm genuinely curious. Tell me in the comments. And tell me what it gives you that watching something new doesn't. I think those answers reveal something real. And if you want to keep exploring the quieter, stranger, more fascinating corners of what it means to be human, you know where to find me.